Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point and Li Xin. In this series, I'll dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, email me at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let me know your thoughts. We start our live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time, so get in touch and we just might read out your comments. This week, we are looking at media coverage on the proposed decision to enact a national security law for Hong Kong. Is it fair? Do the articles give the big picture? What's missing? Before we get to the headlines, a bit of background first. A decision was passed by China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, almost unanimously on Thursday, May the 28th. It aims to establish and improve the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security, to change the long-term defenselessness of the city in this regard. Now, the need for such a law resurfaced in the second half of last year when the city was plagued by protests sparked by the proposal of a now withdrawn fugitive bill, but undermined by some Hong Kongers' deep-seated concerns over threats to their freedoms. The protests began peacefully but escalated quickly. Some protesters started rioting, damaging public property, committing arsons, vandalizing shops, making weapons like petrol bombs and attacking police officers and in some cases ordinary people with opposing views. Hong Kong's economy took a hit and many residents didn't feel safe leaving their homes. A city renowned for its cosmopolitan openness and prosperity was consumed by chaos. It was a scary time for law-abiding citizens who call the city home. Now, part of what makes Hong Kong special is the one country, two systems principle introduced as the city was handed over to Chinese rule after being a British colony from 1841 to 1997. Under the principle, Hong Kong has its own mini-constitution called the Basic Law, and in that constitution is Article 23, which says the city must enact a national security law to prohibit treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Chinese government. But for 23 years since 1997, that law has yet to materialize. After the city was gripped by unprecedented level of violence last year, many believe it's high time for the law to be enacted so that people who threaten China's national security through Hong Kong will face more serious consequences. And since the Hong Kong SAR has not been able to pass the law, China's top legislature decided to step in. Is it legal? Well, there are relevant provisions in both China's constitution and Hong Kong's Basic Law which allow for national laws on matters above Hong Kong's autonomy to be applied to the city. Is it necessary? The answer for many who have suffered from the violence, from the disturbances, from the destruction is a clear yes. From the central government's perspective, to do nothing and let the violence continue would be irresponsible. Some people in Hong Kong see this as a potential infringement on their rights, as the central government chipping away at their freedoms. Well, well-founded concerns could be understandable, and there needs to be some kind of process of bringing people together from different sides. Violence is clearly not the answer. But when you look at how many Western media reports are covering this topic, a lot of this nuance is missing. The context has been swept under the carpet and the focus is on fear and the perceived loss of freedom. Today we'll look at just a few examples and fill out the rest of the picture. First up is a May 21st article from The Guardian. This is the end of Hong Kong. China pushes controversial security laws. The stance here is quite blatant. The headline frames the issue by using a quote from the opposition that's provocative, yes, but fair. No, the subhead doesn't bother to give the broader context or any other side of the story. Instead, it piles on the same opinion, saying proposed legislation would effectively end one country, two systems status, say critics. The article adds condemnation of the proposal was swift amid fear it could erase the one country, two systems framework that is supposed to grant the territory a high degree of autonomy. Among quotes from a total of 10 different sources who are against the bill, there is just one voice from China's central government, a spokesperson from the National People's Congress who says, quote, national security is the bedrock underpinning the stability of the country. So 10 versus 1. What the article fails to point at also is that the decision only targets a narrow category of acts and behaviors that jeopardize national security, and is clearly written in the approved decision to uphold and improve on the one country, two systems. But this fact is missing from the Guardian report. And if you have watched other media reports, you will find a large number of voices which support the bill. These people do not see the bill as the end of Hong Kong, but the beginning of a new hopeful chapter for the city. And these opinions come from many who have lived in the city for many years, Chinese and foreigners alike. They're not given a voice in this article of The Guardian. So where is due impartiality here? Up next is a news article from Bloomberg on May the 22nd. The headline reads, China dares Trump to hit back with Hong Kong power grab. The article starts with, on the first day of China's biggest political event of the year, Xi Jinping sent a clear message to Donald Trump. We are going to do what we want in Hong Kong, and we are not scared of the consequences. Well, that's imaginative and rather dramatic, but unfortunately missing the point. What China does is for China's legitimate good, not to play into anybody else's intrigue. And although we take President Trump very seriously, the new law was not designed with him in mind. He's got enough to deal with as it is. The article also claims, for Xi, the move allows Beijing to reassert dominance over a piece of Chinese territory where his government was rendered impotent during sometimes violent protests last year. Way off the mark again. The central government has been respecting with utmost restraint the one country, two systems principle and letting the city manage the situation on its own. Beijing had clearly other options but refrained from using any. However, that seems to have been taken as a sign of weakness or impotence. To prevent more chaos and further destruction to the city, Beijing has decided it has to take more proactive steps. In a way, those who have been pushing the limits invited this move. The Bloomberg article then lists a whole array of ways U.S. President Donald Trump might retaliate if the bill is passed. This is a typical example of the navel-gazing so prolific in many Western media outlets. For many in the West, the only way to understand issues in China is through the prism of their own construction. That's not always going to work. Our next example features a different take. A May 23rd South China Morning Post headline reads, 2 Sessions 2020 Hong Kong national security law will only target small group of people, Vice Premier Han Zheng says as Beijing hits back at critics. Here we see a bit of the nuance missing in some other reports. Not the end of Hong Kong as we know it, but rather more balanced coverage that features multiple sides of the same story. For example, a quote from Vice Premier Han Zheng while speaking to Beijing's top political advisory body that says the law will plug a legal loophole exposed by violent anti-government protests in the city and will not affect the livelihood of ordinary citizens. But the article also looks at the other side of the story, some of the concerns from the Hong Kong people. For example, when it talks about the possibility that intelligence agencies might be set up by Beijing in the city under the National Security Bill, it quotes the convener of the opposition bloc in the legislature as saying such agencies will be above Hong Kong's law. That's his opinion, of course. So voices from critics and supporters alike are represented in the article, and it does a fair job of explaining the complexities involved in keeping China, including Hong Kong, safe while respecting the one country, two systems principle. It is a sensitive issue, yes, but it's also important to understand the background and wider context to the issue, rather than just zero in on one side of the story. That's the end of my monologue, but the live streaming will continue right after this short break, where I have three guests from the mainland, from the United States, and from Hong Kong joining us to share their opinions. Stay with me. Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point. Welcome back to Headline Buster. I'm Liu Xin in Beijing, and we are pleased to be joined by three guests from the mainland Hong Kong and the United States, respectively. In Hong Kong, we have Witman Hung, who is a deputy to the 13th National People's Congress, China's top legislator. We have Wang Cong, chief reporter from Global Times, and we have Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator. So, gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Einar is not there for the moment, so let me start with Mr. Hung. It's been a while. Haven't seen you for a while, so it's good to have you on the show. So we were talking about this Guardian article, which it was entitled The Death of Hong Kong, Beijing Passes a Controversial National Security Bill. How do you think it is possible that a respected British newspaper would publish something, would pass something which is clearly a heavy loaded opinion piece as a news article, and under such a very much polarized title, clearly stating one side of the opinion? Witman.
Well, this is nothing new. If you remember, there was a very famous cover article on The Fortune in 1995, which said the death of Hong Kong. And in 2018, there was an article on The Fortune again, saying the death of Hong Kong came late, but still sure. That's when Hong Kong's local government was banning on the Hong Kong National Party. So there's nothing new. The Western media had always this, I don't know, it's something deep in their mind that since Hong Kong had been handed over back to the Chinese state, it should die. Whether they, whether it's a reality or whether it's just something out of their wishful thinking. So if you listen to the applause after this motion was passed in the People's Hall, there was applause for almost 45 seconds, almost longer than the one after the Premier's annual report. So it's widely supported by all the deputies, all over China. I mean, if you look at it, when there was a reporter who asked me how I felt, I said, I heard the voice of 1.4 billion people,
Yeah, indeed.
Hong Kong's matter is not just a matter of the 7.4 million, it's the matter of 1.4 billion. I mean, that is something for sure. I mean, whether it's, the Guardian didn't say it's the death of Hong Kong, they said this is the end of Hong Kong. I think to a certain extent it is true. It's the end of Hong Kong as a hub for global intelligence activities. It's the end of Hong Kong as a basis for secession and subversion against the Chinese national government. And or maybe it is now the time, the end of Hong Kong as a battlefield of terrorists against police and ordinary citizens. In that, in that sense, I agree, it is the end of Hong Kong in that particular, position or matter.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. Wang Cong, let me get your perspective. Clearly, if you're respected international publication, you need to be very careful of what you say. If you tell people that what they are reading represents the opinion of the great majority of the people, either in China as a whole or in Hong Kong, you have to be very careful. You know, you have to base that on reality. And yet, for instance, from what Witman was talking about, this long time applause, I also noticed that, and it was very much in the news. Why are the pictures so different? You know, if you just read what's reported on Hong Kong from outside in the West, you will feel that this is a decision imposed on the will of the people of Hong Kong against the will of the people of China, whereas actually the picture is very much different.
Yeah, Lucian, nice to see you, by the way. Two words, sensationalism and bias. I mean, when you read the story, the headline, end of Hong Kong, you know, it rhymes with the end of the world. So they are clearly trying to trying to bait some clicks and get some attention. We're talking about it here, right? So that's what it is with fear-mongering headlines. Hong Kong is not ending by literally, I think, it will not end with the national security law. It will not end with any type of sanction the U.S. can take, including scrapping the economic special treatment. It will not end anyway. Like the deputy said, if their version of Hong Kong is about violence and riot, the end of that, I think, is the good thing. If that is exactly what the national security law is aiming at, ending that version of Hong Kong. And getting back to the broader foreign media coverage of this national security law, I mean, there's a unbelievable level of bias towards this. They stir up controversy. They stir up manufacturing concern and then call the law controversial. It is not controversial because you can go look at the voting yesterday at the NPC closing. It is not controversial in any way when it comes to the procedure of the law's passing. They apply the toughest scrutiny to everything China does with regards to affairs in Hong Kong, but they doesn't apply none to what their officials and the governments say or do. Worse, they're advocating for it, like the Bloomberg piece. They're actually trying to tell a U.S. president, known for erratic, emotional, I think, decision-making, that China is hitting back at you. So you have to hit back with all these countermeasures, all these sanctions that we have listed in this article. So that is where we at in terms of this media coverage. And in China, I think, I mean, the national security law, it cannot be easier to understand. The name says it, national security, and it targets 4 specific actions, specific categories actions. It will not end anything. So that is where we are, bias.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because when I was talking about the Bloomberg article, it is interesting. They actually imagined what President Xi meant to be sending as a message to President Trump. President Xi didn't say that. They make that up and they, you know, make that news article. It's really bewildering to me. How can media organizations do that and to clickbait, to bait clicks, but they're already very, very popular? What is the aim of doing that? Witman, would you have any possible explanation to that?
I don't, because I don't know them, but I think you know, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, and people like to speculate, you know, play one against another, and the story sounds, you know, sounds interesting, sounds exciting. That's probably why. In fact, if just like what you rightly pointed out during your monologue, you know, the matter is purely a Chinese internal matter, and the national security has always been the power of the central government. It has never been delegated to the SAR government. So in this particular case, yes, there was a there was a clause in the Basic Law, Article 23, where they asked the SAR to create its own law. But for 23 years has passed, and we see it very clearly with the current turmoil and the current legislature in Hong Kong. This law wouldn't be passed in the near future, while at the same time, Hong Kong becomes the weakest link in the whole Chinese national security, which is why then the national government have no choice but to take up its responsibility and as a final duty to ensure that the security of the state has been protected.
Yeah, I want to focus still on the role of the media and the impact of media's job. For instance, this due impartiality is a very important keyword, and I think it is a struggle. It is a lofty goal for every media organization. And yes, and yet if you look at the Guardian report, for instance, 10 voices against the bill versus just one. It's not even an interviewee. It's a soundbite taken from one of the MPC deputies used as some kind of voice in support of this bill. So what is due impartiality? It is a big deal. I understand that, and I think it must be upheld. And yet, in this case, in the Guardian's case, do they meet the requirement of due impartiality? And yet, I'm not hearing anything, I'm not seeing anything where they are being scrutinized on that.
This goes way back to all this, since the unrest started in Hong Kong. Of course, we in the media, that's what we strive for. That's what media does, impartiality. You have to make all the efforts. It is hard to be completely impartial when it comes to, especially under this current political environment, that there's so much tension, dispute going on between China and the West. It is hard. However, that doesn't mean that we don't try, we don't make any efforts. There are tons of people on the mainland on social media. You can't, why can't interview one of them and put a more balanced headline in the headline and also on the content. So I think they just don't even try. That's the problem. It's not the problem about how hard the job is. The problem is that they don't try.
Witman, what is your comment sitting in Hong Kong? Have you been approached, for instance, by international media, getting your feedback on this bill or related issues?
No. Well, I did been approached by the South China Morning Post. I wouldn't call that necessarily a international media. No, I have not been approached. I do read the Guardians every now and then, and sometimes I like what they write. But I think, with all due respect, impartiality is probably too much to ask these day and age. I'm sorry to say that, but if you look at all the media's report on the Hong Kong incidents for the past less than a year. And also in day-to-day life, when we look at how the Western media look at what the Chinese does, I mean, it has been beyond one's imagination. I mean, from what I learned, though, is that the universities, when they teach journalism these days, people are talking about advocacy journalism instead of facts. So if that is being taught to our reporters, I mean, that's what's going to happen. I don't like it, but I think that's just the fact that these in age. I remember there was I can't remember who said that. There's a person who was an old BBC guy some time ago. He said opinions is cheap, facts, the truth is more precious. I couldn't remember the exact wording, but this in age, we are so used to facing all these cheap opinions that disguise itself as news. I'm just getting used to it.
Yeah, well, it is a difficult issue, and we're also in it. I mean, including this program that you're watching, and including many of the things that I produce, maybe not on TV on a daily basis, but a lot of opinion pieces I'm churning out as well. It is a universal challenge. What makes the difference between cheap opinion and not cheap opinion? Witman, again.
No, I think all opinions are respected, but cheap.
Okay.
Because everyone has his own opinion. Everyone has their own opinion, and we respect that. But I think what is really important Impartiality is hard to ask, but at least we should show the facts. Okay?
Yeah.
Facts, the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I mean, this is the thing when I learned when I was a kid, and this day and age, that seems to be too much to ask to our media, and that is really very sad.
Okay. Well, at least if you're giving your opinion, you have to tell people that this is opinion. So this could be cheap, or let them judge whether it is cheap or not so cheap, but not pass it as pure facts or pure news report. Wang Cong,
Yes.
what is your take? What is your take on this?
Oh, like you said, I'm very much in this also because this is the type of issues that we cover. We have to be very careful, differentiate, distinct opinion from facts. There are a lot of facts when it comes to covering national security law, legislations like this, because basically the news is about reactions to this national security law. But still, you can. There's clear journalistic skills standards that you can apply. That trying to make sure that the piece, even if it's an opinion piece, it's balanced. There's always a way to this. I studied journalism in the United States. That's what we were taught, and that's there's a lot of ways. I just think that I don't want to be thinking that in saying that this is a hard job, but there's ways to do it. And what saddens me is that Western journalism, which they claim to be free and independent, objective, when they are not when it comes to Hong Kong and China. This is the topics I know. This is what I cover, and what they're saying. They don't differentiate opinion from fact, and their opinions. Some opinions are sound if it's based on facts, reason. But other opinions are cheap. It's quite easy to differentiate, I think, from the reader's perspective as well.
Yeah, well, I think it is possible to have opinion that's based more on facts, more sound, but for the poor consumer of all kinds of information at this day and age, it is very difficult to differentiate between quality information, between quality opinion and fake information or disinformation. I'm told that Einar is finally able to join me. Let me try to get to Einar's perspective. Einar, if you're there, please say hi. I'm not seeing you yet.
Hello. Hi there.
I've
been listening to their conversation with interest.
Good.
So,
tell us about your perspective on this impartiality issue. It is a very important challenge. I acknowledge it, and we are not always up to par, I guess, and yet it seems that it is not just a Chinese problem. Einar, what is your take?
Well, there are legitimate concerns and discussions that need to be had when you have any type of change. That's the role of journalism. But you can't go in with the idea that I'm going to hang these people, but we'll just have a trial for show, or we'll have no trial. And that I think is really what is at stake here. I would agree with my fellow commentators to the extent that journalistic integrity is absolutely essential to the role of the fourth estate, especially in democratic societies. But it's not given here. And part of that is there's a kind of hostility of journalism towards, the communist system in China, simply because they don't see a role for themselves, and therefore they see it antagonistically.
Well, we hope our discussion will help to a certain degree for people to see the bigger picture, and it's always a reminder for us to do as good a job as possible. Many thanks to my three guests, Witman Hung joining us from Hong Kong, Wang Cong joining us from Global Times, and Einar Tangen joining us also from Beijing. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Next Friday at the same time, we'll join us rather, on live streaming and on TV. Thanks for watching. You've got the